Hey everyone, this is Alice, and I'm really excited because we're back for our May movie night. I looked for inspiration about design for this one, and there's a lot of design inspiration. Um, and you all know there's so many beautiful, amazing layouts. Um, I think what I'd love to do is actually put together my own idea of design because some of the ideas that are being shared on YouTube, especially, some of them are very old. Like I see some designers, but they don't show up in the feeds, and it's just like, oh my gosh. But there's really good stuff being shared. So I thought it might be really interesting to kind of look at design principles in a different way for this month and not just look at specifically the world of scrapbooking. Sometimes um, knowing the design principles allows us to use them in our own way on our scrapbooks. So I think that that's really cool. Deborah says she's here. She skipped the gym today, and her Apple Watch said that her readiness was yellow. Yesterday, my Apple Watch says, my battery is dead, plug me in. But thankfully, it's not nagging me about going to the gym because I'd get a lot of nagging right now. What's written on your wrist? Oh my gosh, you guys have to see this. Okay, it says blue dolphins. This is a dolphin. It has a little bit of henna flowers and swirls and stuff on it. It was our trade show in my town this weekend, and one of my swimmers was actually doing free henna tattoos. So I lined up and I figured, okay, well, we'll see what we end up with. My husband was like, do a dolphin, do a dolphin. I'm like, well, she doesn't know how to draw a dolphin. She's only 10. So thankfully it turned out pretty good. And, 10-year-olds are amazing. And I wanted to talk about this during the plan session. So sneak peek. They're adaptive, right? And I think that sometimes as we get older, we forget to adapt and to go with it. So yeah, she said, okay, sure, I'll draw a dolphin. And she's like drawing it as she's trying to think, what does a dolphin look like? But that wasn't the most surprising thing for me. So she wrote blue up here. That all went well. Then she starts writing dolphin. You see, she got to dolphin. Very good. She spelled it right. That was nice. And then she ran out of space for the S. And she just kind of looks and she says, oh, I'll just put that right here. And she pops it onto my thumb beside it. And, you can look at that like failure to plan kind of thing, but she's 10. So, it's more about the fact that she found a creative solution to solve that problem. And I think that that's something that we can forget sometimes as we get older, that, okay, this didn't work out perfectly. What else can I do to make this situation work? And so I think that seeing this and having this like literally on my hand, and it's going to be there for 2 to 3 weeks. I think for me, like having that opportunity to really see that and go there and experience like that, I'm so glad it happened like that. If she had just wrote dolphins, I would have got like, okay, she wrote dolphins, like great. But seeing her adapt to that situation was awesome. So one of the things that we do when we scrapbook is we're constantly adapting to different situations. We have different photos, we have different papers, we have different supplies that we're working with. And, we kind of start thinking, I'm going to make a page with these photos, or I want to tell this story. However you're starting your page. It's funny because when I'm just doing regular scrapbooking, I'm usually starting with photos, but when I'm doing load, I'm so happy to start with a story. My pages just feel more, is it bad to say they feel more important when I start with a story? It's because I tell better stories, right? I know what my story is. I go in with the intent to tell that story. So that's just one of the things that kind of comes for me, and that's why I find so much value for load. That's my experience. Feel free to tell me like what you take out of it. Also, the fact of like doing it every day gets me in that habit and just getting it done. It's just like, oh, so empowering. So yeah, for our movies today, I have 3. They're all fairly short. The first one is going to be very short. And I think that, yeah, so we're talking about the rule of 3, but it's presented in a way that we don't always think about with the rule of 3 because we're thinking about 3 embellishments. So I want to put this little spin. It's like 2 minutes or something, so it's really short. So bear with me as we do this first one. And after that, they'll kind of, I think, make a little more sense as to where we're going with this. So this should be fun. Share computer sound.
The rule of 3 always works. A long and inconsequential presentation that is hard to follow is not going to win anyone over. A presentation must be clear and focused. Your context should drive your message and your presentation must be built around that. All that you throw at your audience should be built around your main message. According to the rule of 3, it is well established that people tend to remember 3 things better and for longer as compared to any other number. We see the application of the rule of 3 everywhere, in literature, business communication, public speeches, storytelling, etc. It's not a coincidence that some of the great speeches, like Friends, Romans, Countrymen, by William Shakespeare, or Blood, Sweat and Tears by General Patton are named so. Even Hollywood uses it. The good, the bad and the ugly. Or Sex, Lies and Videotape. Even public safety campaigns like Stop, Look and Listen. The great Steve Jobs loved the rule of 3. Wonder why, while introducing the first iPhone in 2007, he mentioned it as the 3 revolutionary products in one. No wonder iPhone came in 3 models: 16, 32 and 64 GB storage. In 2011, Jobs introduced the iPad 2 as thinner, lighter and faster than the original. If you have too many factors to mention, it's better to use the rule of 3 and mention there are many factors, but the top 3 are.
Okay, so that's really short. And the thing that I really loved about that piece, like it's very short, he's talking about the rule of 3, but his goal is to talk about presentations, right? He's not talking about scrapbooking, he's not talking about anything else, but how much of that were you thinking, oh, I can use that in my scrapbooking, or I do, right? We talk about the rule of 3 because we're like, we're going to have 3 embellishment clusters. We're going to have 3 of this little piece on here. We're going to have 3 of that. But I think that lots of times in our designing of everything, we forget that we can also design and craft our story to make our story tell a better story. And I think that that's how we can draw inspiration out of like making a presentation. And we're going in different places all today through the videos. But I think that the presentation one can teach us that. So that 3 things. And I think that sometimes that comes naturally to us. I did a page, not even thinking about like a design of 3. And, this is my page from last night. It's very simple. It took me forever for some reason. Somehow the simple ones love to do that. I wanted to knock on wood because everything was so perfect and magical on our trip to Hawaii. We were so lucky. The weather, the car, the ocean. It was also lovely, absolutely magical. So when we're listing things, having those three elements, it just makes sense. And I have probably 5 little pieces of paper where I had tried to write this journaling, and I wasn't doing 3 things in that list, and it felt so awkward. And as soon as I added that third element, it just flew. It flew. It didn't flow. It flow. There was flow. Sorry, really bad grammar. That's awful. So there was flow, and it just felt right. So thinking about how we can draw those 3 things into our journaling, into like telling our story, I think that that's a really great lesson. So that was our little video number 1. Hopefully that leaves you excited about where we're going with the rest of this. So our next one is about making dynamic compositions, and he is also not talking about scrapbooking in this one. We're going to watch the majority of the video. I'm going to be starting it a little bit in because there's a lot of chaos in the beginning. Like it was kind of funny. Like at many points I almost gave up, and then after, once we finally got to the meat of the conversation, I was like, oh, I'm so glad I didn't quit on this. But it's design in graphic design and making images and different things like that. So I think this draws us in and applies to our scrapbooking as well. So we're going to share this next one. Oh. Why is that? Hold on a second. That's not the right video. This one right here. Okay.
Hello, Matthew and Sina here with my first episode on the school. Today, I'm going to be talking about how to create dynamic compositions for your photos, designs, and typography using one key concept: adding contrast. I had such a great response to the article that I wrote on Medium the other week that I decided to turn this into a video so I could show you how easy it is to apply this key concept. If you haven't checked it out yet, go on to Medium and follow me at Matthew and Sina, and you could read the full article there. So let's get right into it. So when I say add contrast, what I mean is everything that makes up any visual frame. So the size, weight, value, and color of your elements inside your frame. By adding contrast to these elements, you're able to control the eye and define the hierarchy, movement, and meaning, and ultimately tell better stories with your frames. Regardless if they're photos, illustrations, designs, it doesn't matter. This applies across the board. So let's jump into our first example here, and I'm going to show you that by adding contrast to a frame, you can give more meaning and tell a better story in the frame. So I've gone ahead and downloaded these 2 vector illustrations of an elk and a wolf. And we all know that the wolf is the predator and the elk is its prey. The way they're composed right now, we don't really get that. There's nothing that's telling us their relationship at all. So I'm going to show you that by adding some contrast, and not just a little contrast, I mean extreme. If I add a little bit of contrast here, it's still not doing much. So here's my first tip for you guys. When you're adding contrast, go extreme first and then pull it back. So I'm going to do, I'm going to make this wolf really big. I'm going to flip him. There we go. And put this elk here. So now we're starting to establish the relationship between these 2 animals. I still think it's not enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm still going to scale this wolf up much bigger so he feels a lot more dominant in the frame. I'm going to make this elk a bit smaller so he feels like he's in danger. There we go. See, just by simply adjusting their size and making more contrast between the 2, we're able to make a much clearer relationship between the predator and the prey. Now I'm going to push this a little bit further and start adjusting their values. And typically the way this goes is things that are in the foreground tend to have more contrast, so they'll have brighter brights and darker darks. And as things recede into the background, they have a lot less contrast and lighter values. I think I want to push this elk back a little bit further. And then I'm going to add a little ground just to give this some context. So as you can see, just by adjusting the contrast now and their values, this wolf feels very dominant, feels like it's in the foreground. Maybe it's lurking within the trees, and this elk just kind of got alerted to its presence, and it's about to get pounced on. So I could show you the same story, but maybe we want to tell the story from the point of view of the elk. So we could flip this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make the wolf much smaller, put it in the background here, and I'm going to make the elk really big. Because I want to tell the point of view of the elk, what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip their values and give this guy more contrast, because one, it's in the foreground, but also I want my eye to go there first. And two, I kind of want to make the wolf feel a little bit more hidden in the background. Maybe he's sneaking around in the trees or bushes, and he doesn't want the elk to know that he's there. Let's make that a little bit darker. So now that we've flipped the size and value of these two animals, now we're kind of changing the story a little bit. Now we're in the point of view from the elk. Maybe he was grazing here in the foreground. He heard something, maybe a branch snap in the background, and he's alerted to it. And now we have our wolf really tiny in the background. He's kind of sneaking around there, and he almost matches the value of the background here. Maybe if we get those closer, he'll feel a little bit more sneaky back there. Maybe he's hiding in the fog in the bushes. See? Simple enough, right? Notice I haven't changed the poses of these characters at all. Really, I'm just adjusting their scale and their values. But just by doing so, you can tell a much clearer story, who the subject is, and the relationship between the two subjects in the frame. Make sense? All right. Let's move on to our next example. So in the second example, I'm going to show you guys how you can define hierarchy in your frames just by simply adding a little bit of contrast. So here I've downloaded a lineup of knights and a king. I bet you didn't even notice him here in the middle of the lineup. And that's because everything right now is the same value, it's the same size, and nothing really stands out. By establishing some hierarchy in this frame, we can make it much clearer as to what the viewer is looking at first, second, and third. For me, I'd like to tell the story about this king right here and how he's leading his knights into battle. So I'm going to start by taking our king, making him really large in the frame. Make him feel like he's in the foreground by making him large and very dark. Let's bring him to the front. So now, right now, the king is the first read, and we see the knights behind him in the background. What I want to establish next is who his right-hand man is. Who is the person he trusts the most? So I'm going to grab this other knight here, scale him up, and he's going to be the second darkest thing in the frame. So he feels like he's standing right behind the king. Maybe in the story he has the ear of the king and he trusts him with everything. The rest of the knights, I'm going to make them the third read, the tertiary read, and I'm going to knock them back first a little bit in value. So I'm going to take these guys and stack them up behind our king. To make it a little bit more interesting, I'm going to shrink these other two guys and make them a little further back. Just adjusting the composition a little bit more so it feels like we are looking at the king first, his right-hand man second, and then the rest of the knights falling in line and following their king into battle. So just by adding a little bit of contrast to this frame, it's very clear now who is the first reed, the second reed, and then the third reed. So my tip for you guys here is the thing that you want to be the most important in the frame, make it the most prominent. And usually that's with the darkest values, the most extreme contrast, and just making sure that that is the first reed that you want the viewer to see. Usually things like the second reed and tertiary reed, those are things that help support the story or give a little bit more insight as to the context of what we're looking at. So here, again, our story is about a king who's leading his knights into battle, and he has his right-hand man right behind him. So for our third example here, I'm going to show you guys how you can create movement in a frame just by increasing the contrast. Since we've been working with mostly illustrations up till now, I'd want to switch gears and use typography and show you that the same principles apply. So for those of you who haven't had formal typography education, here's my tip for you. Type is not scary. Just treat it like any other shape and object and you will be fine. So if you keep the same principles that I've been teaching you in the first two examples, this one shouldn't be any different. So I'm going to show you how we can create a little bit of movement here between these three objects, this 1, 2, 3 that I typed out. First, I want 1 to be the first thing that we look at to establish that hierarchy. 2, I want to be the second thing, and then 3, I want to be the third thing. And I want to create this kind of nice clockwise motion in the frame. So I'm going to arrange these in clockwise order. I think to emphasize the movement here, I'm going to create a little bit more contrast between these three objects here, which is our type. Right now I'm using Museo Sans, but I like this font just because it has a lot of weights, and I could just show you that by adjusting the weight of this type we can create a lot more rhythm and movement in this frame. I'm going to make this 2 a little bit wider, or lighter. I'm going to make this 3 really light, and I think a little bit smaller. And then I'm going to adjust the value of this 1 to be a little bit darker. This 2, I'll probably leave it that value, and then 3 I'm going to make a little bit lighter. Oops. Just the 3. So, if I'm doing my job right, the way your eye should be moving is in this direction. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And so on and so forth. So you can see that just by adding contrast to the values, the weight, and size of these objects, I'm starting to create a nice rhythm in my frame. It's very, very simple, and it's the same rules that applied from the first two examples that I showed you guys. So just by controlling the hierarchy and controlling how the eye moves, we can definitely give a frame and any object, whether it's an illustration or typography, some nice movement and make it more dynamic. So I hope all of these examples were easy to follow and that you're on your way to making more dynamic compositions for your illustrations, photos, and designs. Let me give you guys those tips one more time that I gave through this video. 1, make sure you start extreme when you're adding contrast and then pull it back. 2, the thing that should be the most important in the frame should be the most prominent in the frame, so add more contrast to that thing, give it darker values. And the third tip for you folks who haven't had a traditional typography education, treat type like any other object or shape. It's not scary, you can make type look good too. Let me know if these tips and examples were helpful to you by leaving a comment in the video, and tag me on social at Matthew Encina. I've also included below a few helpful links and resources in the description below.
Okay. Oh, it didn't end. Why did that not end? I closed the thing. Okay, let's close that one. Okay, so I really thought that that was interesting. I know that some of it feels like it might not specifically apply to scrapbooking, right? Because he's showing us pictures of nights and he's laying them out. And it can be hard to think, how does that apply to my scrapbooking? Like, how are these things? But I thought that the whole presentation actually goes really perfectly with scrapbooking. It's all about how we lay out our pictures, how we're laying out our our typography, like our titles, right? Our subtitles, all about those things. Deetra says that was very interesting. It made me think about picture sizes. Jody says, I can see how it fits with scrapbooking. And Deborah's like, you did a lot of research for this event. I try to find an idea that, will help us develop our skills or give us something fun to try. And so that's our goal with this. And I wanted videos that are good to watch, that have a lot of meat to them, right? I'm always looking for the meat. So I've just grabbed a couple of examples, like quickly, from my own scrapbooking, and it kind of shows that after you've been scrapbooking a while, you pick up some of these skills. So this is a page I had done before, but you can see I'm talking about my dream house. So that's the picture that I made, the big picture. And then these other ones here are helping to tell the story, but they're not the main part of the story, right? They're the embellishments that help tell it. So when you go back to the example of the hierarchy with the knights, that's kind of what I've created. And I've made this part have more contrast by putting it on the sparkly gold background. And even in the titling, right? I've got my building our house. Could this be better if this wasn't like so faded into the background? Probably, right? And like you see it, right? And he was like, no, that's fine. But when you see it now, like I look at it and it seemed great when I was building it. When you're holding the page, it's fine. But if you're just looking at it from afar, you see our dream come true. It doesn't read as nicely as it could, but then I've got this little subtitle there. So I've even created some hierarchy in my title, but there's still lessons to learn, right? Jody says, interesting how he changed the perspective of the story by changing from the wolf to the deer. I know, but I saw that, I was like, that's awesome. I loved that so much. It was the part that kind of hooked me in, and I was like, okay, this is like super good. And then I loved the way he summed it all up. I thought it was great. And like, seriously, if you guys watch, I will include the whole link. If you go back and you watch the first minute and a half, you'll be like, how did she even end up watching the rest of this? Because it was kind of chaotic, right? It was kind of like really young YouTubers. It kind of had that feel to it, if you know what I mean. Anyways, just another example of trying to like define that perspective, to define that contrast. I've got this lovely background here. That's a picture that I took, but then I've included the picture of us. And I think that, I've got my big title, but then I've got my descriptive title as well, like subtitle, and it's creating the balance with the different weights of things. And this one here, I've got like a gazillion photos on it, or I don't know, like 20 or whatever it is, but this is us, right? So I put us as the big ones, and then I've added everybody else as the other ones. And if you actually look, my husband is in all of the other photos. So it's not just me, guys, just not just me. When you see a selfies of Alice, not just me. Apparently my husband will do that too. But it was, you still catch like the focal point by having that bigger perspective and giving that one picture more weight and letting the other ones help support it. So just kind of pulling it back into that world of scrapbooking. So I have a question. Do you do that, right? Like, do you what is your scrapbooking like? Do you tend to use photos that are just one size? Do you change up the size of your photos? How about with your titles? Do you use different sizes? Like when he took the examples of kind of what he'd been showing us all along and he used it for the fonts at the end using the words, I was like, oh my gosh, it was so good because it really pulled it into our world, right? That we're using titles, we're using typography all the time. And he showed like that really dark, bold one, the medium two that was getting a little smaller, and then the thin, tiny, and even with the size and the widths of the fonts that he was using, right? It wasn't just that it was bigger. The numbers, the letters, the font characters actually got smaller and tinier. Deborah says, I change it all, but I don't know what I'm doing. Deborah, you've been at this for a while. I bet you some of the things that you're doing are intrinsically learned through practice. And maybe we don't always have a name and a title to put on it, but you can tell that something feels right. It was like when I first learned, somebody said, oh, I always make my people point inside my page. So like going back to this page really quickly, because it's sitting right here. I've got this picture of my husband into the page. If I put this picture over here, it feels really awkward. And until you kind of understand he needs to be into the page, like whoever is on it needs to face in, you know, that becomes a design principle. And once you kind of learn it, then I can't even imagine putting it on the other side now. She says, Deborah says, I try it, and if I like it, it stays. Yeah, no, that's perfect. But I think like anytime, you know, I don't want to spend a lot of time learning principles, right? Like I want to be able to do the stuff. But if I can learn little bits along the way and pull from other people's good stuff, then it really helps. Jody says, I use standard size photos more than anything else, but I think you can make a photo the focal point, even if it's the same size, by using contrast. Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, and it all comes to how you lay it out. I have this page here, and like these ones aren't exactly the same size, but they're relatively close. But obviously, I have featured this one and included these ones to add details. So it totally works. Sue says, I feel validated because I did a title the other day with lots of fonts, which I never do, and I carefully chose the main words font in a thicker, darker font and made it bigger to draw attention to it. So apparently I knew what I was doing. Of course you did. Your stuff is wonderful. But I think that, you know, just, you know, once you know those tricks, like you can use them, but once you kind of know, you're like, oh, yeah, of course I do that. You know, and when we see people that have the great titles with, you know, the bold font, the slightly smaller font, and maybe like a little extra little thin typey font underneath, like I'm attracted to titles like that on pages. When I see people do them, I'm like, oh, that's a really great title. She's so good at titles. Well, why is she so good at titles? Because she's using those contrast elements like he was just showing us. So I think that was really good. And then our final video today, it's about layout and composition design. It's kind of talking about magazine stuff, so it's a little bit in that graphic design field again. But I thought this was good, so we'll try the last little piece here today. Oh, I didn't close that one.
Master layout and composition design, then you're on your way to mastering graphic design in general. So today, follow along with my tips on how to master layout and composition design with Satori Graphics. Layout plays a significant role in graphic design, and layout refers to the arrangement or elements on a page, usually referring to specific placement of image, text, and style. If a design has a poor layout or composition, then the viewer is going to be turned off, and either consciously or subconsciously they will reject and move away from your design. Graphic design is a visual communication, and utilizing quality layout design will communicate the right message to any viewer. So essentially, mastering layout and composition design is essentially setting yourself up for making quality graphic designs. When viewing a design, the eye generally needs a place to rest on something of interest, as a means to hold the viewer's focus and attention. Otherwise, the viewer will look at your design and quickly move to something else. In layout and composition design, making a focal point has the benefit of both drawing in the viewer first and foremost, but also retaining their attention once they've been enticed into your design. It is also a good idea to communicate the most crucial information in your focal point, and it doesn't need to be an image or graphic, because typography can be used as a focal point if done correctly. So yeah, build a focal point, increase the scale and give it some room to breathe. The example that you can see on screen now is a perfect example of using a bold focal point, and the colour mix works in harmony. But however, the headings and typography are very poor in my opinion. But what are your thoughts? Seeing as we just discussed the focal point in layout and composition design, I'm now going to tell you about a little known rule commonly referred to as the rule of odds. This suggests that when designing a focal point, it's best to keep the number of design elements within that focal point in odd numbers, so either 1, 3 and 5 and so on. In quality layout design, this is often seen by using a major focal point in the middle and then 2 smaller design elements on either side. This creates harmony and balance, and all good layout design requires balance in some way throughout. You can actually see the rule of odds in various logo designs too, if you keep your eyes peeled and look carefully. The rule of odds is not absolutely essential, but it's something to keep in mind when working on layout and composition design. This is one of the most important things you need to keep in mind when working on layout and composition design, and thus is essential to mastering it thereafter. Luckily, we have the align tools and windows at our disposal, as well as a grid and guides to boot when working in Adobe Illustrator. If you're having issues with working on alignment, it would be a great idea to create a kind of grid using the guides and the rulers. In fact, most designers will use this when working on composition and layout design. You should always look to try and align text and image elements on your design where needed and where possible. There's nothing worse than a design has poor alignment, as it just looks wrong and it will turn off the viewer. As designers, when working on graphic design, one of the most key essential points that you need to keep in mind for layout and composition design is balance. We're actually almost kind of like digital feng shui masters, in that we need to keep balance and order throughout design, like you would in a home when thinking about feng shui. It is a lot like setting up a home for the viewer, allowing them to come in and have a look around. You want them to feel comfortable and at ease, and you want them to feel as if they want to return again sometime. So keep in mind that in terms of composition, white space or negative space is also a design element, and it should be taken very seriously as any graphic or typographic content. White space gives the eyes a path to follow through the design, directing and channeling the viewer. Give each design element on the page some space to breathe, like I've said before, and the balance between negative and positive space will come naturally. Contrast might seem counterproductive when we just mentioned balance previously. However, if contrast is performed correctly in terms of layout, composition, design, it's going to fit into a design with harmony and ease. Contrast is useful because it can drive attention to a specific part of your design, but also it can actually attract a viewer to your design, making the design stand out and interesting. Contrast can literally guide a viewer around the design, and if a design lacks contrast, the viewer and their attention might feel lost. However, it is possible to have too much contrast on a design, so execute balance and awareness when focusing on contrast on your layout or composition design. On this design, notice that there's actually a strong sense of contrast between white and yellow here, but on each side of the page, there's a small sample colour of the opposite side. This is balance within contrast. So there is today's video on 5 points that can help you master and utilise composition and layout design for your graphic designs. Let me know what you thought of today's video right down in the comment section below, and if you want to see more videos like this, drop a message and I'll look into making more in the future. Like and share this video on social media if you do find it useful.
Oh, jeepers.
But anyway, guys, until next time, that's only for today. Peace.
Okay, there we go. Missy, we had to head out. Sue said, we're feng shui masters. I think so. It becomes figuring out how to create the breathability, how to focus in on our story, how to, represent the part that we're wanting to represent when we're creating. And says, thanks so much. Look at this on replay. Yeah. I think that by creating using those elements, like he was talking about focal point and scale, and we just had that perfect example with like, the little wolf and the big deer and the big deer and the little and the little deer and the big wolf, and seeing that contrast, how that helps your story play out. He talked about a rule of odds. So it's funny because lots of times we hear about the rule of threes, right? And we even heard that in that first section for storytelling, where it was like using 3 of something to help illustrate a point. But we hear about the rule of threes, but it also applies to odd numbers as a whole. So it's not just 3, like you can do like 5 or 7s anytime you're using these kind of clusters. 4 tends to feel awkward. I just did 4 on a page the other day, and I have to tell you, it felt awkward on my page until I finally gave up and was like, no, I'm going to throw that extra 1 on there. I was trying to do the Tuesday, not Tuesday, the pairs, Penn and Teller prompt from Load. Right. Like one of the things was use pairs of embellishments. And I'm like, I'm trying to do pairs of embellishments. And I'm like, oh my God, I hate this prompt so much. This just feels terrible. So I'm just curious, was anybody using pairs, or were they like hating my guts at that moment? That's totally allowed because I thought that was super challenging when I was trying to do it, because of what I've become so used to seeing and so much like that I'm so much attracted to. So just curious, how did anybody pull on that pairs, and did they have fun with that? Jody says, the rule of odds works in lots of different things, like say hanging photos on a wall, an odd number looks better. Absolutely. Absolutely. I know that I have a gallery wall just outside of my scrapbook room here, and it's a grid of 9, right? Because it's got the 3x3. It looks awesome. So that's really good. Lets me put up my layouts. Yeah, so I think that that's just different things. He talked about alignment, lining things up right. And sometimes it's, it's funny because things don't have to be perfectly lined up for it to feel perfectly lined up. It really depends on that level of contrast. So it's funny because as soon as we learn the rules, we can find all of these little ways to kind of break those rules too. So I think that's fun. He talked about balance and white space. And I think learning about white space, negative space was one of the hardest things for me to grasp when I was first learning about it. And now it's something that I tend to try for naturally a little bit more. Like, has anybody like really found something challenging? For me, I struggled with the idea of white space at first, not being white. Because yeah, it doesn't have to be white to be white space, right? Just that room to breathe in a layout. Let me see here. I have an example of white space. It's funny because white space doesn't have to be empty for it to be white space either. Like really, this is a background paper. It's not a picture I took, but this side basically operates as white space. It's interesting still, but it's like it's very calm. It's very neutral on that layout. And even though this is like a picture of the greenery, it's still acting as white space. It's just there to kind of draw you into the rest of the layout. So yeah, but I think like it's one of the things I don't take enough advantage of on the layouts, like using that empty space to kind of draw myself in, something I could still work on. Yeah, and then after that, he talked about contrast and driving attention to specific parts of your design. And that's exactly what we want to do. That's kind of our whole purpose. You know, as we create our page, as we tell our story, we want people to like zoom in on our photo and then, you know, read the title and bounce to the journaling. Like we want to lead them on this visual storytelling. And so learning how we can use these skills like the contrast, I think that really helps us to hone in on creating better pages so that we can tell better stories on our pages and make our page tell a story. It doesn't have to have like a bunch of journaling sometimes to tell a good story if we've done some of the layout design good, right? So yeah, that was just some of the things that were inspiring me lately. I just thought I should ask, like, is there something that you do from a design element standpoint that is really good for you? Another thing that I tend to watch for is the rule of three, or the rule of thirds, not the rule of threes, the rule of thirds with taking photos, doing photography, taking photos. Yeah, and putting people on the proper axes. Just trying to find a good example because a million of my photos are selfies, and so they don't fit well with a rule of thirds kind of thing. Okay, here we go. So here's a better example. So if we imagine this picture and we drew a grid over the picture, let's see here. And we split our picture into this rule, into this grid. So we've got the three, like the line splitting us into thirds vertically, and we've got the line splitting us into lines horizontally across, whichever way you want to look at it. Whenever we put our subject photo in our picture at one of the axis points, whenever we put the person here, 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 or here, or whatever subject we want to look at, that's where it's going to look really good in photos, right? That's the whole rule of thirds with photography, and it works this way too, so it doesn't matter. Any photos that are doing that, like where's my eyes, where's my face? It's right there on that upper axis, on the upper crosshairs access point, right? Like that's right where my face is. And those photos are always ones that draw your eye in. Whereas when you have a photo with somebody that's directly in the middle like that, it doesn't feel dynamic, it doesn't have motion, it doesn't have flow. So if you're wondering, like, why is this other person's photos always so much nicer than mine? Maybe they're using that rule of thirds. So it relates to that rule of threes almost. Like I kept thinking that they were the same thing, but with photography, putting that person on that access point, it lets you get something else in your photo, especially if you're doing like selfie-esque type photos like these, but it puts them there and it gives you that motion in the photos. And sometimes they're not perfect. Like if we look down here on this one here, I'm on the axis line, but my head is maybe a little higher than it could be or should be, right? But just general rule of thumb for stuff. So anytime I've learned these kind of things, all of a sudden you see, why do I love this photo? Oh, it follows this rule. Sue says, I learned this idea in Allie Edwards' Lens of Joy class, but it's hard to remember when you're actually taking the photo. Also, she uses negative space in the photo as a place for word, art, or journaling, which I really like. Yeah, that's like a super, super fun thing to do. I have it. I'll pull it up here on my desk, actually. Yeah, so I kind of hid my journaling down in here, but I kind of hid it in this little space. Yeah, no, I think that Allie Edwards is so good at that kind of stuff too, right? Um, but yeah, one thing that you can do is on your phone, you can actually go into your camera settings and you can turn on those grid marks. So I don't know if I remember how to do this. In the camera settings, I think it's in general. And then you go into the camera settings. I'll find it and I'll share some directions for an iPhone at least, but you can turn on those grid marks so that when you take a picture with your camera, oh no, these, I must have mine on already because like you can see that when I have them on, there's like those little faint white lines on there, and that helps, right? It gives you this little visual reminder. Okay, put the head right here. And then you have it there. Most DSLR cameras, so even if you're using a big one, you can have those marks turned on. Some don't even turn it off, I think, but a lot of them allow you to choose whether you want them on or off. It's just those little subtle reminders, but you can have it on your phone too. If your phone isn't bringing it up automatically, it's a setting you can turn on for it. Jody said, that would be good if you tell us where to change it on phone. Yeah, I'll find it. And I don't know for Androids, if you're on Androids and other stuff, I'm sure there's a setting for you too. Good luck. Sorry, I just don't have one. Yeah, but yeah, I'll find it and I'll share a little thing like with directions on where to go so that you can turn them on. Because I know at one point I turned them on and I probably haven't turned them off since then. So yeah, just found it. Sue said, just found it. General settings, camera, grid. There we go. So go to your general set. So into settings, go to general, and then camera. Oh, I don't see the thing. Camera. Anyways, okay. I'll double check it. She says, awesome, now I have them. Yay. See, it's easy. It's easy, I promise. Yeah, but I think that those kind of things, it's just that little visual cue, and then you put the person's head or, in lining up on any of the points really looks good. And it helps to give you almost that white space in your photo or helps you set a scene in a photo. So lots of good things with rule of thirds in photography. So yeah, all of the design tricks that kind of help us to do better as we're making our pages. Anything that gives me like an easy boost for my photos to make them better. Jody says, I did it. Yay. Okay, awesome. This is good. So yeah, we're figuring it out, and yeah, it's simple, and it doesn't print on your photo. Promise. It doesn't show up on your photo. It's all good. It's just there for your guidance and to help you. So good stuff. Yeah. So we have other things this month. I mentioned that we have happy hour on the 22nd. And then on the 25th, the Scrapbook Live. The plan session is on the 28th. And I've included links to all of our events on the calendar page. So if you're logged into the Scrap Happy website and you click on calendar under the members only tab, it will, all the links are underneath the calendar there so that they're easy to access, just in case your email doesn't come out on time or something like that. Like that's the goal. I'm still sending emails. Haven't changed that, but it just makes it a little bit easier so you have a go-to place to find the stuff. Sue says, I'm excited because it will totally help me remember to not put my subject as center. And like, there's still times where you might, right? I'm not saying like never put your subject in the middle. Like if I look at my pictures, like lots of them are in the middle, but not everyone. It gives you this creative dynamic. And when you're sitting down to scrapbook and you have this other image, you're like, oh, that's so beautiful. I love it. So still play with it. It's fun. Jody says you can always crop your photo too. Absolutely. Yeah. Like if you have this wonderful photo. So my husband took this one and it's like, it's pretty good. I'm nearly on that grid line, nearly, right? Maybe not as much as I would like. There could be a little more sky on this photo. It wasn't there. It's for me to add it. But, you know, if I looked at this and I wanted to zoom this in, I could make this into a different shot. I could put myself in the middle of the screen. So, you know, it's easy to change that kind of thing. So yeah, that's kind of fun. Okay, well, I hope this was good. I hope you were inspired. And I love looking at areas outside of our little world of scrapbooking. Like, there's a lot of examples, and where there's some really good people. If you are interested in seeing how a lot of this applies to your scrapbooks, I do know that Allison Day has a great design principles video. Here, let me write down, and I'll link them in the thing. Allison Day has a design principles video. I think it's about 45 minutes or something like that, but she has lots of actual examples on scrapbook pages. And I think it's part of a series where she actually talks about all of these different design principles. And then she has like a final one where she shows you the same layouts and how other design principles fall into them. So it's really good. Janet from RTS, Record the Story. She has some design principles YouTube videos as well. So I'll pull up, I think she has a playlist for them. I think so. And then there's of course classes and stuff like that we can take. And if this is something that you like, let me know, because I'm talking to an instructor right now for a reunion. So, you know, if you're like, more design, we want to see good design, we want to put that into action, we want to use that, let me know, because reunion, I'm literally right now talking with the instructor, or one of our instructors. We have some good stuff, guys. Have some good stuff. Jody says you can always crop your, oh yeah. She says, I like Allison Day's style. Envious that you met her for lunch. Oh my gosh, she's so good. She's so good. Yeah, and she's coming to reunion too, actually. So that's exciting. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me today. Super fun. Really excited for movie night. I just feel super inspired. I think load is a big part of that, but getting to hang out together, super fun. Learning a little bit of stuff, pulling from other industries that are creative industries to kind of give us the ideas and to set the stage. I think it's inspiring. So I will share the full replays of all of the videos on the replay page. So if you're like, I wanted to see that again, I wanted to go right into that, it's going to be there for you. And I'll share links to a couple of those videos, like Allison's videos and Janet's videos. Teacher says, great ideas, Alice. I feel like I really learned some great ideas. And Rose says, hi, everyone. You missed meeting again. Oh, I'm so sorry, Rose, that you missed it. I'm going to put the replay up as quickly as I can here today. So hopefully you'll be able to catch that. Oh, she's got her 90-year-old mama with her today. Well, happy belated Mother's Day to your mama. Okay, well, I'm going to run. Have a great day. Happy scrapping, everyone. And I can't wait to see your layouts in the Load gallery. Okay, bye.